In this installment of The Dude Perspective, we will be looking at the third of three classic dystopian novels, 1984 by George Orwell. In The Dude Perspective, we provide nothing more and nothing less than that, the Dude Perspective. I do not provide perspective as the dude, I provide perspective as a dude. This is valuable because there are many dudes out there attempting to engage in broader conversations, and my platform here is meant to arm these dudes appropriately. Full disclosure, I thought that this series on dystopian novels would be more interesting and less depressing. Boy howdy, this series has been a drag. Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, Animal Farm by George Orwell, and finally 1984 by George Orwell. Now, interestingly enough, it is my understanding that this book was written in response to Brave New World. In Brave New World, Huxley projects a future in which the masses are controlled by the injection of pleasure into the lives of people. Apparently, Orwell considered that for about 5 minutes before he rejected the idea as naive and assumed that if people were going to be controlled in the future, it would not be through the injection of pleasure, but the injection of pain. In 1984, we see that Orwell was apparently quite serious about that. There are a lot of videos not just on 1984, but also how Brave New World is a counterpoint to it. I've done my best to avoid watching those videos before I recorded this video, because I figured if this video was to be useful to anyone at any one level, it would be useful because it was my unique thoughts and perspective. Where I doubt I have anything truly new to offer, something that someone has never considered before when it comes to this fertile but well-traveled ground, I suspect that is highly unlikely. But in watching this video, you can at least be assured that my thoughts are my own and not merely borrowed opinions. The internet has far too much of that nowadays. This book has much to say about language. In the world of 1984, the leaders have discovered that if you control language, you can control not only what people say, but what thoughts they have. In the world of 1984, the language is purposely being eroded to the point where each word is narrowly defined by the central government into successive editions of the Newspeak Dictionary. With each new edition of the Newspeak Dictionary, the restriction on language and therefore the expression possible in the language diminishes. Communication becomes efficient but stultifying. The only things that can be said are not very satisfying to say and go without saying, so nobody bothers saying them. The often mentioned Big Brother is the mascot of the central government of Oceania. Oceania is one of three world powers, the other two being East Asia and Eurasia. At the opening of the book, Winston Smith is a member of what is known as the Outer Party of Oceania. The book tells the tale of his journey to the Inner Party. This book felt like two books in one. The first part of the book is a story about Winston in his day-to-day. The second half of the book is a societal dissertation on how and why the society was functioning the way it was. The second half of the book reminded me a bit of Atlas Shrugged, and its tendency to go off on tirades for pages at a time. Yeah, this one sort of does that. It just mercifully lacks the legendary Randian long-windedness. Tirade or not, I admired Wells's explanation of what was happening to Winston and why. It makes the ending of this book all the more ominous and lacking in hope. And spoiler alert, if you do not want to know what happens in this book, this is where you will want to stop watching the video. For all the rest of you, let's hop into our DeLorean and go back to the year 1984. In case you're curious, we do not know if the year is truly 1984. Nobody in the world of 1984 can nail anything down with any degree of certainty. Control the language, and you control reality. This book opens on the life of Winston Smith. Winston ekes out a pathetic and depressing existence as a member of the Outer Party, constantly under the watchful eye of Big Brother via sound and image surveillance. Imagine microphones everywhere, and then compound that with not only the screen to view, but the screen to be viewed through. Yes, in many respects, we are rapidly approaching this level of privacy erosion in modern society. But in our case, we are stupidly opting for it voluntarily rather than fighting every step of the way. You will likely find Winston to be a pathetic sort, but at least in his case and those of his fellow citizens of Oceania, it was done to them rather than by their own hands. Stepping down off the soapbox now, Winston is employed at the Ministry of Truth. At the Ministry of Truth, Winston is one of the people who alters the public record to make corrections. In some cases, the changes to documents, news stories, books, poems, any fixed media are innocuous and inconsequential. In other cases, they are enormous changes, like the time Winston had to work for days to help change the media history to reflect that Oceania was at war with Eurasia and was an ally of East Asia, and had always been so, despite Winston knowing that was not the case. It was Winston's job to control the future by controlling the present, which is rooted in controlling the past. Winston was quite good at his job. He lived in a crappy apartment by himself. He had been married, but his wife had moved out. Winston was dissatisfied and did not much care for Big Brother. The uneasiness leads him into the part of town populated by the proles, the unwashed masses that were not part of either the inner party or the outer party. Winston Smith purchases a notebook, a pen, and some ink from a small shop in Parolesville run by a Mr. Carrington. Winston takes a long lunch one day to go home and write something. Winston is careful to do this out of sight of the telescreen and is careful to hide his notebook. It wasn't the case that what he was doing was illegal, strictly speaking, but bad things happened to people in 1984 when they did things that were considered odd. People doing things considered peculiar were vaporized. People were never seen from again and erased from existence with the help of people like Winston. Winston hates Big Brother. The notebook is his way of rebellion. It is a struggle to write anything, but once committed, the words come to Winston. However, he longs for connection. More than anything, he wants to speak to someone. Eventually, a girl he is familiar with at the Ministry of Truth pretends to trip to the floor in his presence. Winston helps her up. When she grabs his hand, she slips a piece of paper into it. Winston is too cautious to do anything other than slip the paper into his pocket for examination at a time when nobody nor the telescreens were watching. When he finally gets alone, Winston opens the note to find 3 words: I love you. This was the life vest that Winston had been looking for. His wife had left him, and the society repressed sexual expression, so Winston had plenty of pent-up demand for this kind of situation. The young lady's name is Julia, and she is a member of the Anti-Sex League, as evidenced by her red sash, but she is a fellow dissident at heart, and as such, wears her red sash ironically. This affair with Julia is not Winston's only dalliance on the wild side of 1984. Winston's awakening ability to express thought also manifests what starts as a fantasy relationship with an inner party member he knows only as O'Brien. In an eye contact moment, executed across a crowded room right around the time he received Julia's note, Winston convinces himself that O'Brien is a fellow dissident by way of a short moment of eye connection. I'm not kidding, it reads like a bad bromance novel. And there are reasons for this weirdness. We are watching what rebellion to Big Brother looks like. It looks like hunger for human contact and connection to the point of overanalyzing even brief moments of eye contact as something more. Winston's budding ability to connect with people is awakened, and it drives him to engage in increasingly reckless and peculiar behavior, eventually resulting in him returning to the shop from which he bought his contraband notebook. He winds up befriending the shop's owner, Mr. Carrington, and eventually rents out the room that he and Julia can meet in. This becomes their regular thing, and as we are soon to find out, having a regular thing in 1984 is not a smart plan. Big Brother is always watching. Eventually, Winston makes contact with O'Brien through a convoluted and careful set of machinations. Winston visits O'Brien, and upon entering O'Brien's house, finds that members of the inner party have the privilege of turning off their telescreens. O'Brien does so and reveals to Winston that he is a member of a resistance known only as the Brotherhood. O'Brien promises to get Winston a copy of the book that he will need to read. O'Brien eventually talks to both Winston and Julia and demands their allegiance. O'Brien demands loyalty. He demands that Winston be willing to commit atrocities on behalf of defeating Big Brother. Winston agrees. O'Brien promises to send the book. Julia's interest or enthusiasm for O'Brien, the book, or the Brotherhood is limited. It is after they meet in Mr. Carrington's shop's rented room, and after Julia and Winston defy Big Brother by having sex because, it's sex, that Winston pulls out the book and reads aloud to Julia. Winston feels safe doing this because he does not know that a painting in the room is masking a telescreen. After Winston properly incriminates himself and Julia, they are ambushed and taken into custody, sent to the Ministry of Love for what every citizen knows happens there. Winston will see Julia again, but the reunion will be tragic. At this point, the book takes a turn and becomes a political treatise. It turns out that Julia never betrayed Winston, but O'Brien and Carrington were in on it from the beginning. Winston is tortured in the Ministry of Love. The penultimate scene includes the revelation that through all the torture, Winston had never betrayed Julia. Not that he needed to, but it was still important enough that his torturer, O'Brien, takes the final step. Knowing that Winston has a particular aversion to rats, a wire cage is built that includes 2 rats and attaches tightly to the human face. There is a gate that keeps the rats away from the person strapped to the cage, but O'Brien has his finger on the cage release, after which the rats would begin to gnaw and eat their way through Winston's face. It is a truism often repeated in 1984, everyone always confesses. To save himself, Winston begs that the cup pass to Julia. O'Brien has done his job as an inter-party member, and now Winston does not need to be vaporized. Winston is released. He gets a new job. His life is regimented. He does not ask, does not question. A reunion with Julia is described in which the 2 former lovers barely interact. Whatever bond they shared had been irrevocably damaged in their own private session in the Ministry of Love. We know this because both are still alive. In the end, everyone always confesses. The closing page of the book sees Winston professing his love for Big Brother. So come on, what's the dude perspective on 1984 by George Orwell? Well, dear viewer, I ask you, why read a book? Why read any book, fiction or nonfiction? Do you want truth? Do you want adventure? Do you want stimulation? And if so, what kind of stimulation? Intellectual? Erotic? Our language is alive, despite the often repeated notion that there exists something that is properly described as the Queen's English. There simply is no such thing. There is not a correct language. There is only language, and our willingness to let it be what it is without trying to control it is what creates the dynamic space in which creative stimulation finds its fuel. As a species, we are driven more by the possible than the manifest, more by the hinted at than the actualized. 'Twas always thus, and always thus will be. For Winston Smith, in one case, the gray area he discovered and created, rebellion against Big Brother, brought him Julia. Julia was able to feed one aspect of Winston's longing, but he pushed on and found a way to address the other vacancy in his life through O'Brien. And O'Brien ultimately not only fails to fulfill the longing that Winston was hoping O'Brien could address. In the end, O'Brien removes both senses of emptiness and replaces them with something else. O'Brien replaces Julia and himself with Big Brother. And so that leads me to the final question. Did the rats in that face mask cage of Winston's have names? And were they Julia and O'Brien? So there you go, the dude perspective on 1984 by George Orwell. I hope you liked the video. If you did, like, share, subscribe. You know the drill. Comment, always comment. Let people know. Engage with the content. This is life, if I recall correctly.